as I was saying, in great detail through the letter to the Hebrews, right? The mysterious letter to the Hebrews. We picked up last week in chapter 3, verses 12 through 19, right? A great attempt to try to wrap up chapter 3, and I could not pull it together in an hour, so that becomes part 1 of 2, right? What we did last week is part 1 of chapter 3, verses 12 through 19, and what we're going to do today is part 2. What we managed to get through last week was verses 12 through 15, right? Just those handful of verses right there had so much content, so much to ponder, so much to talk about, that it took up the whole hour easily, right? As we move further and further into this mysterious letter to the Hebrews, we're going to find some heavy material. And the nature of the material, because it is a Hebrew author speaking to Hebrew people by lineage, they're Christian by faith, Hebrew by lineage, we're going to be doing a lot of bouncing between this here letter to the Hebrews, which is a New Testament book, and a lot of Old Testament stuff. And that's pretty much where we're going to pick up today. We left off, in fact, last week with a story that happened in Exodus, right? Where people were starting to turn their backs on Moses and on the God of Moses as they were becoming frustrated with the situation at hand. As the story was, they needed water, and God led Moses to where water was, but the people had already muttered and groaned and spoke against God and spoke against Moses to the point where it bothered God heavily, and well, it was another example where the Israelites during the Exodus made problems for themselves with their moaning and groaning and contention, right? The story took place in a place that ended up being named two things, Massah and Meribah, right? Massah means proof in Hebrew, and Meribah means contention, right? The people got contentious. The people were looking for proof that they weren't operating in faith anymore. They were tempting, and they were trying the patience of the Lord. And they did it at this place that ended up getting named for that fact, right? Being contentious people against God and against Moses and requiring proof, not operating in faith, right? Not able to take that next step. But, you know, the irony, and probably get into this a little bit more as we go along, right? Right now we're just kind of doing a little review, right? We're starting into the review of last week where we left off, and we're going to pick up and finish off what we started last week. Again, this is part 2 of chapter 3, verses 12 through 19. Just so much stuff in there. But that's where we left off, and that's a segue to where we're going. There's going to be more talk in this letter about the unbelief of the Israelites during that time and how it angered God, and really the results and the outcome of the unbelief. I'm going to read to you a story out of Numbers, which, if you haven't heard it, it might make you go, whoa, you know, whoa. It's crazy. It's weird, you know, but it is what it is, and there's reasons for it, right? It all worked out in the end for us in the new covenant. So anyway, just to review last week, and it's going to be hard to do. Like I said, we did 4 or 5 verses, and it took the entire hour plus. It was like an hour 15 or something like that. I went over, and I still couldn't get it done. So much stuff in there. I'll try to bullet point what we did, try to get you back on with it, and of course you can always look back. I keep this here on this One Cowboy Under God Facebook page. I guess it's a page, not a group. So it's there. That's what that page is for, to kind of hold this stuff that I'm doing as teaching. And I also have a YouTube page out there where I'm placing it. I'm kind of editing it. I'm getting the video turned around in its right way, so my left is left and my right is right, that sort of thing. Putting some text on, so as you're watching it, you could kind of follow through where I'm at and everything like that. And you can listen to all this stuff. You can watch all this stuff at your own leisure, right? That's also called One Cowboy Under God. You go on YouTube, do a search for that, or do a search on my last name if you know how to spell it, right? That's the big test right there. I know you love me if you could spell my last name, right? But you could search on either of those two things and it'll come up. You go in there, I got some playlists, you find the one with the letter to the Hebrews, and right now we've already got, I think, 7 lessons done, working on number 8 here tonight. I think that's how it is. And there's going to be a bunch of them before we're done. There's also other stuff on there. So anyway, a little side note, but you can always refer back to this. I don't really intend for this to be so live. I don't intend it for this to be interactive, right? I'm teaching something here. So, but you're welcome. You're welcome to join in. I don't mind an audience at all, but just know, if you have to cut out, you can always go back and get it, right? If you don't want to sit here for an hour, because that's how long I do this for, you can go back and look at it another time and take as much of it in as you want to, break it down however you want to, take notes, everything. It's out there. I'm keeping it for posterity. That's how I call it. All right. Anyway, so what we went through by bullet points last week, right? I got my notes here, and there was a lot of them. We talked about, firstly, an evil, unbelieving heart. We defined all those things. What is evil, what is unbelieving, and what is heart. We put it all together. We define what that is too, right? Evil, unbelieving heart. And basically, any heart that doesn't believe in Jesus, this is the premise here. As a Christian, right, this is our understanding as Christians. If you do not accept God on God's terms, you're evil. Okay? Because we're all tainted. We're all tainted by the evil in our nature. Our sin nature taints us, no matter how good we might be otherwise. And we are. We're both good and evil, right? There's Keith Gill. Keith Gill taught me that when I was a teenager. You know, I'm a little bit good, I'm a little bit bad. The lesson that stuck with me, and it makes sense. It's even scriptural, right? I don't even know if he knew that at that point in time, but it is. It's very much so, right? It's our nature to be both good and evil, and we require the, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I can't think of it. I say it and I teach it all the time. We're looking for Jesus to vouch for us, right? Jesus is the perfect one. He is the one without sin, the one without evil. And if he accepts us as part of his team, if you want to look at it that way, he vouches for us, right? We are therefore credited as good, even though we have evil in our nature. Okay? We're always going to talk about this evil nature, no matter what I'm teaching, no matter what I'm preaching. That's always going to come up, because that's what's at hand here. That is the dilemma that we're under, and that's what our faith in Christ is resolving for us, right? So we're learning that without Jesus vouching for us as he does, and he does that because of our belief in him, right? We don't have that belief in him. He doesn't vouch for us, and there is nothing to credit us as righteous, which means right with God. We cannot be right with God without him vouching for us. He will not vouch for us if we do not bow to him, if we do not give our faith to him. So those who do not do that remain bad, as evil. No matter how good you are, how nice you are, how generous you may be, it's all tainted by the sin in our nature, right? That is the Christian outlook on the dilemma of mankind and the solution to it. And I'm sorry if that rubs you the wrong way, but that's what Christianity is ultimately all about, right? That's what we're dealing with as people. So that's an evil, unbelieving heart, right? And we talked about encouraging one another. And that comes into be a very important thing, you know. Think of it this way. I don't know if I taught it this way last week, but I've taught it like this in the past many, many times. The idea in a Christian faith of encouragement. Think about it. Think about, you come to Jesus, right? You come to a strong and convicted faith. You commit your life to him. You prove yourself in oh so many ways, right? And why not just die right then and there and go to heaven and get on with your life eternal, right? Rather than kick around here in the muck and the mire, because the world sucks. Don't try to tell me otherwise. It sucks. It's supposed to suck. I'm not going to go down that path right now, but it's a shit world, and we can be elsewhere. We can be in paradise instead, just by our faith. Why would we be here at all if we'd already come to faith? It's like we won the game. Why stick around for this, right? Well, there's a reason. The work of God gets done by the people who commit themselves to God. And that work of God is encouraging others to Jesus Christ. encouraging others to get faithful and to stay faithful, right? And there's a reason the encouragement is necessary. We talked about that too. Because the sin in our nature remains in our nature. And the temptations of the world are always going to be coming at us. And we need encouragement to stand up against that stuff. You know, we need encouragement to stand up against that stuff. We need encouragement. When I say stand up against that stuff, that means stand by your faith. If you didn't need encouragement to stand by your faith, what would you need encouragement for? Right? Some people believe that you come to faith once and for all, and it's once and for all, right? It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. But the Bible tells us otherwise, and we saw so much about that in these handful of verses that we read last week. And I hate to be the bearer of that kind of news to you. And I feel like when I teach this kind of stuff, I lose like 30 friends at a time, you know, but it's true. It's true. It's totally true. I've looked at it every way, upside down, sideways, inside out. There's no getting around it. Encouragement wouldn't matter if it wasn't necessary, and it wouldn't be necessary if our faith wasn't continually in jeopardy, all right? So I preach that. I preach perseverance in the faith. And the perseverance comes from the encouragement of other people and us encouraging other people, all right? It's a big deal. It's really what it's all about. It's a reason why we don't come to faith and just get taken right up to heaven, right? It's not like we get there and win the game. We still have to prove our faith. We try our faith. Our faith gets seasoned. And in the seasoning of our faith, we become more powerful. We become stronger and stronger and stronger, able to bear greater temptations, able to overcome more difficult situations, and we become the inspiration for others to do it. Tell me you haven't looked to others for inspiration in your life to get over the hump here and there. No matter how great you are, how cool you are, how rich you are, you always got to look to somebody else for that inspiration. And that's why we remain here. That's why preachers preach and teachers teach. That's why Christians show up at church all the time. You know, we're not out on an island when we come to faith, all right? I don't want to get preaching here. I'm teaching. This is a review of what we were doing last week. But there was a lot, and it took a long time. And this is why. This is exactly why. It's deep stuff, it's heavy stuff, and it's most important stuff. All right, but we talked about that, encouraging one another. Then we got into this idea, and I just kind of tied it together with encouragement. If we hold fast, what that means is perseverance in the faith, right? That's a fact. That's a biblical fact. I laid out in the New Testament 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different places in the New Testament besides this letter, which mentions it a couple of times itself. And that doesn't count the Old Testament at all either. But it talks about persevering in the faith, right? And there may be more than that. That's just 15 that I pulled up, okay? The concept of persevering in the faith and what that does in terms of making us stronger and being necessary, okay? It is all over. It is all over the New Testament, and I don't know how you can deny it, right? But we talked about that. We talked about all kinds of other things with that. And that got us to the end. We talked about the hardening of the heart. That's an important concept too, right? The hardening of the heart. I don't know if you remember us going over that. You can read about the hardening of the heart in Romans 1. You get about halfway down into it. Whatever Paul was talking about, he starts to go off into this thing about what we know as the reprobate mind. And that's the hardening of the heart. That's what it looks like. You know, there's people that continually resist Jesus and continue to resist Jesus and continue to resist Jesus. And why do we do that? Why would we resist Jesus Christ? Because we know Jesus Christ is emblematic of all the things that we want to do that are not good. Okay? When Jesus comes, the party is over. And we don't want none of that. We don't want none of that. And we don't want a guy like me. We don't want a preacher showing up on our Facebook as we're scrolling through, you know, who is emblematic of reminding us about the things that we do in our lives that are, at best, questionable, at worst, worse than that, right? We don't want that stuff, so we resist it. We resist it. Do we all do it? I did it. I did it for a really, really long time before I came to faith. And a lot of y'all out there popping in now who see this know me. You know how I was back in the day. And you have no idea what has happened along the way and what I've become now. But you remember who I was. And it seemed like if anything was impossible in this world, it would be for a guy like me to come to Christ. But it happened. It happened. It happened. Right? The world itself is the best salesman of this faith. I'm not here selling the faith. I'm teaching the faith. And I'm trying to encourage those of you who are considering it to take the leap. Get there. Get there. The fence belongs to the devil. You can't sit on the fence no more. Get there. Right? That's what encouragement is. Right? I'm bringing Jesus to you. I'm bringing the Bible to you. I'm bringing encouragement to you. Okay? That's what we do as Christian people. That's all I'm doing here. I can't sell it to you. I can't sell it to you. But the world will. The world will kick your ass. And when you finally get on your knees, you need somebody to pray to. You find out that God is there and he has terms, and his terms are faith in Jesus Christ. You have that faith in Jesus Christ. You make that connection. You make your communion with God, and everything starts from there. All right? Well, we talked about that reprobate mind. That resistance we have, and it's made of the sin that we keep on living in, like a sinful lifestyle especially. And it talks about a particular lifestyle in there. I'm not going to get into that now, but there is one, and you can't help but see it when you look at it, and that too will piss a lot of people off, but it's one of many. And you can go into 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 6, verses 9 through 12. I hope I'm right about that, but you look at that, and it will talk about these kind of lifestyles that if we get ourselves caught up in it, we're probably not going to be entering into the kingdom of heaven, all right? Be very careful of these things. And the one that's mentioned in Romans 1 is also mentioned there in 1 Corinthians. Anyhow, that's what we went through last week. The last thing we did, I already talked about up front. The Massah and Meribah, that episode where the people were thirsty and they were following Moses. Moses was being led to water, and Moses was told where to find the water. But already the people were trying God's patience, and they were contentious. They were questioning everything, and they were really showing their unbelief. That's where we step in now. Now I'm going to reread everything that we're studying, that we're talking about this week, that we've reviewed now, and that we're about to finish off. We've got 16, 17, 18, 19. We've got 4 more verses left to do to finish off this lesson and this chapter 3. But I'll read the entire thing over again once we get cooking. But before we do that, I'm going to give you an example of what these disobedient Israelites were doing, what they were all about. Okay? And I'm going to read that out of Numbers. Numbers chapter 21, verses 5 through 7. It's only a couple of verses. It's a story, all right? It's a story, and it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. If it happened in this day and age, you'd be like, whoa, 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 okay? This don't happen. But it happened, all right? It happened a long, long time ago. 3,000 some years back, it happened. Let me read to you, okay? Like I said, it was the book of Numbers. It's way back in the beginning. It's one of the books of Moses, right? We're talking about Moses. We've been going through this comparison between Moses and Jesus. And we keep going back to these books written by Moses. The book of Numbers is one of them. Way in the beginning of the Bible. You go find it. Chapter 21, verses 5 through 7. I'm going to read out of the New American Standard Bible, NASB. I like that one. I like a lot of them. Don't get hung up on that, all right? Chapter 5. Chapter 21, actually I'm going to start at verse 4, okay? Then they set out from Mount Hor, H-O-R. I think that might be short for Horeb. Those of you from Martinsville, raise your hand. We had the Mount Horeb Road, right? Went up the mountain, up the second ridge, right? Start again. I get off track very easily. Then they set out. These are the Israelites, right? The Israelites following Moses. Then they set out from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the people became impatient because of the journey. Mark that word, impatient. They became impatient because of the journey. The people spoke against God and Moses. They spoke against God and Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we loathe this miserable food. The miserable food, the manna that God gave from heaven, right? Now we get into this story in verse 6, right? The Lord then, in response to this people and their behavior, their problems, their complaints, their griping, he goes and does this. The Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, And they bit the people so that many people of Israel died. So the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned because we have spoken against the Lord and you. Intercede with the Lord that he may remove the serpents from us." And Moses interceded for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a standard. And it shall come about that everyone who is bitten, he will look at it and he will live." All right, and that becomes something different. That becomes sort of the art of God. That becomes a depiction of Christ on the cross eventually, 1,000 years later, a little bit more than 1,000 years later. Okay, so that part of it, the cure to the venom of these fiery serpents, is just gazing in faith upon. It ends up being a bronze serpent that Moses puts together, right? It's a heavy story. I don't really want to break it down and rip it apart. Although that's my inclination to do all the time when I open up the Bible. Look at it again, go deeper, deeper, deeper. There's so much in there. It's not a normal book. You don't just read it in passing and move on. You read it, reread it, take it in. It means so much. That little story, those handful of verses, they mean so much. But in the black and white of it, at face value, you have a people that were miraculously led out of Egypt. They were slaves. They were led out of the greatest empire known to man to that point in history in all kinds of miraculous ways, including the parting of the Red Sea, right? Which they were able to escape through, and then the Red Sea itself turned on the trailing Egyptians and drowned them all, right? They come out alive on the other side, on the way to some promised land with a leader who's got personal contact with God and with angels guiding their way. So what do the people do? And I don't want to say this like, what did them Jews do, okay? It's not that. What did us people do? That's who we are, okay? That's how we are, all of us. We're all that way. What did they do? Well, it was great when it happened, but like a day later, it's like now you're roaming around in the desert and it's hot and you're hungry and you're thirsty and you're sick of eating the same stuff and you start being pissy and whiny. And God wasn't having it. God wasn't having it no more. He was just sick of that. And it just kept on happening. There's just story upon story. The people just being discontent and losing faith. They would gain faith by the observation of some kind of great miracle that happened. And then a day or two would go by, and then it'd be as if nothing ever happened. And what is this God? And, you know, what does he ever do for us? He's done all this for us. But we lose sight of it. And they go from belief to unbelief to belief to unbelief, and to the point where it aggravates God. And what does he finally do? He sends fiery serpents among them all. They are venomous, and they bite them, and they kill them dead on the spot. I mean, that's serious. That's heavy. Now, that story becomes a prelude to the rest of what we're talking about in the letter to Hebrews here tonight, okay? I wanted to read that up front, just to give you a flavor of what's going on. And that's only one flavor. We talked about the Massah and Meribah. That's another one. But there's just story after story after story. You know, we didn't even get into like the golden calf and all that. It just keeps on happening, right? And then the history of the Israelites, it just keeps on happening. God makes a covenant with the people. They break the covenant. God gives them all kinds of warnings that if you don't get your stuff right, this bad thing's going to happen. If you do it right, these great things are going to happen. What do? They fail God. They break the covenant again. And it's just on and on and on. It's a recurring cycle all the way up until God just finally stops making covenants with the people. And he goes silent for 400 years and sends no more prophets. The last thing a prophet said, last thing Malachi said, right, was that a herald was going to come and announce the coming of the Messiah, basically, and that a Messiah was going to come to follow. And it ended up being John the Baptist, and of course our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Anyway, okay, let's now just read the portion of Hebrews chapter 3 that we started last week and that we're trying to finish here this week. Okay, so go to Hebrews chapter 3, verse 12, and we're going to read through 19. Okay. Hebrews 3, verse 12, 19, and I'm Just going to jump right in because I had it bookmarked. All right. Verse 12, again, New American Standard Bible, NASB is what I'm reading out of here today. Okay. Take care, brethren, that there not be any one of you, excuse me, let me start again. Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ, if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. While it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as when they provoked me. Right? That's what we kind of read about right there in the Old Testament. For who provoked him when they had heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Verse 17. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? Like we just read in Numbers, correct? And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believe not? So we see, and this is the summary of the whole chapter, right? The little discourse that we're going through here with this author to the Hebrews. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about belief versus unbelief, right? Those are really the main themes, but there's just so much subtopics here in chapter 3 that a man can't contain the information and the wisdom and the knowledge and get it through it all in right detail in only an hour's time. I can't do it. I can't do it. This is me here, uninterrupted. You know, when I teach on Wednesday nights, I get an hour to do it, and we struggle to get things done in an hour. But I got people asking questions, and I got answers, and people making testimonies, and you know, there's no excuses here. It's just me, and I've already taught this before. This is not my first pass through here, right? I know what I'm dealing with. But even still, to get through a handful of verses that are so full of so much, it's going to take a little bit of time, all right? And we're taking up some time here, just getting to start. Okay, now we've done a review. We've read the story Numbers with the fiery serpents. We've read our lesson material, the scripture that we're using for our lesson here today and for last week, verses 12 through 19. And we're going to pick up now at verses 16 through 18, right? Kind of grouping them all together. Right? We're going to talk about those who were disobedient. Again, we just read about the Israelites out in the wilderness following the exit, or in the process of the exodus out of Egypt and on the way to the promised land, right? I read that to you all as an example of what we're talking about here, about the disobedient people. In verse 16, it went like this. For who provoked him, right? The author is asking the Hebrews that he's writing to, right? The intended audience, this question. For who provoked him? Him with a capital H, him. So we're talking about God. For who provoked God when they had heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? So that's how we know that we're talking about the events of the Exodus, right? In the books of Moses. And you can pick, like I said, any of a whole bunch of different stories to show the point of disobedience that the people had and God's disfavor with them, right? But make no mistake, when I say with them, I'm not talking about them like the Israelites were some kind of peculiar people all by themselves that would react this way when everybody else would not. That's not true, all right? Their own human nature, which we all share, all of mankind, tends us to respond exactly the way that those people, the Israelites, at that time did, okay? Provoked, all right? I bothered to look up what the Greek word behind that translation is. It's a parapakreno, right? Parapakrino, big long Greek word. What it means, and you probably know in your heart what this means just from your experience, but this is how a Bible dictionary laid it out in accord with that Greek word, okay? To embitter, to exasperate, and then, of course, to provoke, okay? Translated as provoke, and you think about provoke, it means to embitter, to exasperate. When I talk about the Israelites displaying this kind of behavior collectively as a very large group, you're talking like 1 million people, right? They're displaying this kind of disobedient behavior not once, not twice, not 3 times, but time and time and time again. And even God above, the creator of all things, the Lord, becomes exasperated with it. And of course, embittered. All these things add up. And it's their actions that provoke God to respond emotionally this way. So God was provoked by the disobedience, right? It mentions in the next verse, I'll read verse 17, and with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? Right? We gave you the example of bodies falling in the wilderness in the story with the fiery serpents. They were envenomated, is that a word? Venomized. They were bitten by venomous fiery serpents whose bites killed them off, right? Killed them off. Did not instantly kill them off. There was a little bit of time for them to make recompense and do the right thing when the right thing finally became available, right? You had the bronze serpent that Moses would hold up. All they had to do was look at it and they'd be cured of the venom, right? So there was a minute there, but when they got bitten, to go and do that and take care of it. So it wasn't instantaneous death by these things, okay? They became sick first and they ran for help. And they had time enough to do that. Just like any other snake bite would be, right? It's pretty much like that across the board in the natural realm as things are today. But 40 years of God's anger, right? With whom was he, capital H again, God, with whom was God angry for 40 years? And like we're talking about the whole time, that there is a reference to the Israelites in the wilderness on the Exodus from Egypt to the Promised Land, right? That whole first generation that came out. How many amongst them actually made it to the Promised Land after 40 years' time? Now, in that story with the fiery serpents, I made a point. I highlighted a point as I was reading through it. There was a word that came up. The word was impatience, right? The people became impatient. And then the next thing you knew about them people is they were pissing and then they were moaning. And they were falling out of their belief. They started to doubt heavily in Moses and God also. And we're talking about unbelief here, right? Belief and unbelief. And now we're starting to really lean towards the unbelief stuff. And in this unbelief, we see a cause. If there ain't more than one, there's at least this, impatience. We have impatience with God. Like we want something and God isn't delivering. And we don't get it on what? Our terms, right? Not only what we want, but when we want it. That's our terms. When this whole faith thing is about meeting God on his terms, we're trying to get it on our terms. Raise your hand if you made that mistake in your life. Raise it really, really high if you made that mistake in your life a lot. And raise it, stand up, and raise your hand if you made that mistake in your life, and you made that mistake many, many, many times in your life, and you did it over a very long period of time, okay? That's me. And maybe that's why I am who I am. All that failing and everything that led to in my life delivered me to the foot of the cross in tears. And when God lifted me up, my scrawny little spirit, my withered, dying spirit, and put a little bit of life back into me, it changed who I am from what I was, you know? And the path now, so many years later, has grown me up kind of strong. I'm not that scrawny spirit anymore, and experience the things that I encounter in my life, which used to knock me on my ass, do not do it no more, I'm better, I'm stronger. Am I all there? No, I'm not all there. Point I'm trying to make, impatience will cause unbelief in us, right? And that's because we are trying to conduct our relationship with God on our terms and not His. Before we even commune with God at all, we make that mistake our whole life. What's happening here is a situation where you did meet God on His terms momentarily, but then you tried to change the terms back to your own. And when you do that, and He doesn't respond, because why should He? He's the creator of all things. The relationship starts to kind of decompose a bit, right? You start to not have belief because you're like a little baby. Like, I'm a little baby. I want what I want. I want it now. I'm not getting it, so get out of here. Get out of here, Moses. Get out of here, God. Get out of here with all this stuff. I got this, right? And that's who we are. That's exactly who we are. And that's what we're talking about here. With that kind of attitude that I just expressed, God becomes embittered, He becomes exasperated, He is provoked, and He will turn and either just turn His back on you, which is hell enough, believe me. This world without God sucks, and it's cold, and it's empty. I got a word, dysphoria. Think about that. You don't know what that is? Look it up. I lived that years in my life. It's the opposite of euphoria, right? It was true. It was true. I was able to get away with my punk ass attitude for as long as I could do drugs, as long as I could stay drunk. And when that didn't work anymore, I was spiritually stuck. I was in a really bad spot. Now I had to be real, and I had to deal with reality as it came. And now dealing with reality, I started dealing with reality a long time before I came to faith, but I didn't really understand my reality all that well until I came to faith. But I've been living in reality for better than 30 years without the assistance of drugs and alcohol, right? And that makes me who I am. That makes me see things how I see. It gives me the worldview I got. It's not skewed, okay? It's not skewed. Anyhow, that's all good and fun. We still got a good 17 minutes left here, right? And we've gotten through, a verse and a half? All right. I got a little note in here that talks about the difficulty accepting covenants. And that may be speaking to what I just kind of ranted off on a little bit there. I got into a little bit of a preaching thing there. I can't help myself, It's part of what I do. They overlap. Preaching and teaching overlap. So forgive me, okay? But I'm speaking the truth, true as I know. The bullet point here that I have written down, I'm just going to read it to you. The Israelites had difficulty accepting the old covenant, accepting the new covenant, and keeping every lesser covenant in between. All right? That's kind of what I was talking about. I'm going on God's terms, right? God was making terms for these Israelites, and they want to accept it, but they don't want to accept it. And how do they prove that, right? First, they take him on his terms, but then they try to take the terms and make them their terms. So they weren't really accepting his terms, and that's what the covenant is. That's what it's based on. And if you don't accept it on his terms, you try to make it on your terms, you just threw the covenant away, right? The Israelites had a problem with the old covenant, right? Now, step back right to the beginning. Let's get this context set up again. This is the letter to the Hebrews, right? The author is a Hebrew who's been converted into Christian, and he's been at it a little bit longer than the people that he's writing to. And the people that he's writing to, right, the intended recipients of this message are also Christian Hebrews, or Hebrew Christians, however you want to put it, right? They come from the Hebrew culture. They were Jews, Israelites, whatever you want to call them, right? You know what I'm talking about. But they left Judaism and entered into Christianity when they got the message that Apostle Paul was delivering, right? Delivering around the Mediterranean. This entire letter, right? The letter to the Hebrews is this author trying to explain the new covenant to old covenant people. They were raised with this old covenant, right? And they're having difficulty with it. So this letter becomes necessary to help them understand what they're dealing with, right? So that's why I say they have difficulty with the new covenant. We see how they had difficulty with the old covenant. And then I talked about all these little covenants in between. You know, every time that they would break a covenant, God would kind of redraw it and recreate his terms to try to make everything right and keep that nation of priests that he was trying to develop perpetuating, right? And then they would fail every little covenant along the way too, until he was so exasperated. Oh, and this gets serious. You know, I've taught some things that the people in my class be like, whoa, I'm not going to go there today. I almost did, but I'm not going to go where I was going to go, okay? I'm going to hold off on that because I got to keep like the last 5 friends I got, okay? But it's serious stuff. It's serious stuff that's happened in lines like that. But again, I want to reiterate, we all have difficulty keeping our end of the deal, right? That is why we must persevere, why we must encourage, and why we must receive encouragement. The whole point, right? Again, none of this is bagging on the Israelites. This isn't bagging on the Jews like some kind of special people that cannot keep a covenant. This is talking about us all as human beings in our sin nature not being able to do it. Not being able to do it. We can't keep a covenant. We struggle very hard to keep the covenant. And the covenant had to be made easier and easier to do all the way along the way. What could be easier, right, than just coming to faith in Jesus? Compare that with like keeping the 10 Commandments perfectly, right? All you got to do is have faith in Jesus Christ. You know, but that's hard enough to do too, because you got to bow down to God. You got to accept God on God's terms. And, you know, it's not perfectly easy, but it is simple. It's very simplified. The law becomes love, right? You become faithful unto Jesus Christ, and then you focus on love. You know, giving. What's love? God is love. Love is God. So it all becomes about God. And then you'd be like me, because you're just always thinking about and talking about God all the time. And you're some kind of freak out on the internet. Just God this, God that, Jesus this, Jesus that, Bible this, Bible that. You become that way when these things start to like fall into place and make sense to you. As they've done with me. This is why I do what I do. And why I am who I am. All right. Let's see if we can't wrap this up now. Time enough to do it. We started getting this thing called God's rest, all right? Now, this becomes a topic unto itself, and we're actually going to pick it up again next week when we get into Hebrews chapter 4. It gets a little bit more into this God's rest thing, so I'm not going to go very much into it now, except to say this, all right? God's rest is given both in this life and in the afterlife, right? It's called in this life the Sabbath, right? One of the 10 Commandments was to remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. What was the Sabbath day? Well, God said in them commandments that you didn't work, all right? One day. On the 7th day you did no work. It was emblematic of God himself during creation. He worked 6 days creating creation, and on the 7th day he rested, all right? So we work also 6 days, and then on the 7th day we rest. And it's not just that we rest. We see to it that everybody about us rests. If we have employees under us, they rest. Our wife rests. Our kids rest. Our servants rest. Even our animals rest. You've got donkeys out there, beasts of burden, right? Ox and steer, cows, animals that do work for you, horses, they all rest. Everything rests. It's all about rest. And but it's all emblematic of God, how God did it. He worked creation and then he rested, right? God wants to see to it that we all get that rest. And that rest joins us with him. It gets deep. So you've got this rest in God here, we call the Sabbath. Now the Sabbath works differently in the New Covenant, right? We'll probably end up getting into that next week than it did in the Old Covenant, right? We don't keep it the same way. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. When we go to Jesus, now we have our Sabbath rest in him. It works differently, right? A lot of things work differently in the New Covenant, and that's one of them. And a lot of people, a lot of quote-unquote Christians don't understand that. They get all legalistic and twist up the New Covenant and screw people's heads up, all right? We'll clear some of that up next week, I'm sure. Also, when we die, though, we enter into rest also. We call it paradise, you know. So we enter into a rest in our life, which we call Sabbath. We enter into a rest in our death also, which ultimately we call paradise, like I just said, or a place of comfort. And the thing about God's rest is in verse 18, and to whom did he, capital H, that's God, right? So, to whom did God swear that they would not enter his rest? But to those who were disobedient, right? In this case, specifically the Israelites, but really ultimately everybody who's all about the disobedience, everybody who's not going to come to covenant with God on his terms, or who's going to break that covenant. That's what disobedience really is all about, right? Not so much you commit a sin, but it's breaking covenant with God. There's your disobedience. And those are the people that don't enter into the rest, okay? Now, what I got left here is one verse, verse 19, and I've categorized that under a summary because this verse, in its own way, kind of summarizes everything that we've read from verse 12 on down, right? Verse 12 through 19. I'll read verse 19 to you one more time here. So we see that they were not able to enter that rest, whether in this life or in the afterlife, because of unbelief. Okay? Unbelief is critical here. Let's talk about unbelief. Unbelief is made of evil. Our unbelief comes from a malignancy in our nature. Right? I love that description. What are we talking about? We're talking about sin. Sin in our nature. A malignancy. Like cancer is malignant, right? Sin is another word for the evil in us. Sin describes both the source of our immoral thoughts and the actions that the immoral thoughts generate. Right? And as we read through the New Testament, we see the use of the word sin used in those two different ways. Sometimes it is the source, the evil in our nature, that generates sinful actions, and in other times it's really just the action itself, right? An example of the action itself was when Jesus was confronted by a group of Jews who were dragging alongside of them and behind them a woman that they referred to as an adulteress, caught in the act, right? The adulteress. And this is where Jesus ultimately says, he who is without sin, go ahead and cast the first stone, right? Well, where was I going with that? There was something, talking about sinful actions, right? When Jesus had said that, and when everybody had cleared away, because none of them were without sin, none of them had a stone to throw at the woman, what did he tell the woman? He said, woman, go and sin no more. Is he talking about the sin nature in you removed from you completely? No, the woman had no power to do that. And even upon faith, that doesn't happen with us, right? Jesus was the only one without sin. He didn't have that sin nature like we all do. And therefore, he didn't have the sin action that happened with it. But when he told this woman, go sin no more, what was he saying? Stop adulterizing. Stop whatever the word is. Stop being an adulteress. Okay? You done did it. You got busted. You should have been stoned for it. But because we are all guilty of sinful action, because we all really ultimately have a source of sin inside of us, which is our nature, our evil, Jesus managed to dissipate that angry crowd and give that woman one more chance to get her stuff together, right? And he told her to sin no more. He's saying, stop being an adulteress. Just stop doing that. Stay out of trouble. I don't want to see it no more, you know? It looks like that. Anyway, that was a little side jag, but it pretty much expresses that point of view. Another thing about unbelief, and that's what we're talking about here, right? We're reviewing this whole verse, again, for those who join in late here, we're going through Hebrews chapter 3, verses 12 through 19, and it's really a thing about unbelief. a comparison of belief and unbelief and the results thereof. Another thing, bullet point I have on unbelief. Unbelief prevents us from God. You got to believe it to see it. And that's something that I teach, and I teach frequently. The idea that you got to believe it to see it. When you read the Bible, right? If you don't approach it like that, you're never going to get it. If you're going to spend all the time in your mind saying, or you're looking for reasons not to believe the Bible, you'll find them. You're looking for reasons to not believe anything, anywhere, you'll find them. But when you change your perspective on things, right? It takes a good ass whipping to get there. That's what it took for me, right? I decided that when it came to Scripture, I had to believe it in order to see it. So when somebody hands me a Bible, somehow, some way, whatever I'm reading, even if it seems crazy and contradictory, somehow, some way, it's got to be true. There's something wrong with me because I'm not seeing it. I've got to change how I'm looking at things in order to get to the truth. And then it turns me into a person, when I get to that truth, as a person of truth. Which in my mind, my stupid, insane, crazy mind, makes me qualified under God to teach Bible because I put that kind of effort into it. And then I can use that to help others, to encourage others, right? It's part of who I am. Sorry, if you don't like it. Okay, again, we continue with this summary, talking about unbelief and things related to unbelief. Our faith can waver, even fall away. We've learned that a couple of times on the way to where we are in this book of the Bible right now, this letter to the Hebrews. Our faith can waver. We got the example of impatience causing it, right? Impatience happening when? When we have already met God on God's terms, and then we try to change the terms to suit us, right? It's like me. My ass is whipped. This world has kicked me down. I need Jesus. I go to a pastor. I say, Pastor, I need Jesus. And he prays with me. And he baptizes me. And I'm in covenant with God. And I'm grateful and I'm happy. And there's a great emotion about it. And the angels are singing in heaven. And 2 days later, all I can think about is, oh, I'm so alone. Oh, I don't have a job. Oh, my back hurts. Oh, I need something. God, give me this. God, give me that. God, give me that. And then, after 3 days of that, it's like, God, I'll tell you what, if you don't give me this, it's going to prove to me that you're not even there. And that's exactly how this works. That's exactly how our faith dissipates. And that's why it requires other people around us to keep us in line. It requires a herd mentality, full of encouragement to keep us on the straight and narrow. You understand that? Left to our own devices, we will talk ourselves out of the most important thing in our life. And then we die and go to hell. Anyway, perseverance in faith is of paramount importance. That's what I was just talking about, the most important thing, right? Perseverance in faith is of paramount importance. It is what our lives, both individually and corporately, did I not just talk about being in church, being in the herd, getting in the middle of the pack for encouragement, are all about. It is why churches exist, right? Finally, one last bullet point here, summing up this thing about unbelief that we've been reading these past 2 weeks. Faithlessness, unbelief, prevents us from the kingdom, as it prevented some of the Israelites from the promised land during the Exodus. Now you see how, in this manner, what happened with Moses and the Israelites in the Exodus is a snapshot that is prophetic, that shows how things work in the future, right? Our future. The old covenant reveals something about the new covenant. And we're talking about unbelief. You couldn't enter into the promised land. You can't enter into the kingdom. What is the kingdom? Oh, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. It's described both ways in the New Testament, right? They both mean the same exact thing. It's not two different things. You could call them either or. It's God's kingdom. It's heaven's kingdom. God's abode is heaven, right? Anyway, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, is opposed to the kingdom of Satan. And another thing that we call the kingdom of Satan, we call the world. So when you walk into a Christian society, a church, a Bible group, whatever, and they talk about the world, because you'll hear that, you know. I have like this dictionary in my head from when I started going to churches, of words that like Christian people use that nobody else did, right? And everybody says the world, but when a Christian says it, it means something different, you know. The world is the kingdom of Satan, and that's what we're born into, and that's what we default to because of the evil in our nature. The evil in our nature comes from the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, right? Our natures were changed when Adam and Eve partook of whatever that fruit was, right? Off the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? There's the good and evil. That's the descriptor. When they did that, their eyes opened up. What does that mean? That means their nature changed from what it was. Their nature was more like what a dog's is. And the dog don't know good from evil. He just knows love. And that's what it is when you don't have evil involved. And that's why a dog is the example that came to mind. Who shows the unconditional love of any creature in this world but a dog? Henry's incredible, right? And Coco, my dogs, and the Kara's dogs. Well, one of her dogs ain't so like that, but deep down she is, right? But I mean, Henry, he's the unconditional love dog. And you all got one. You all got one, right? You got a dog. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that's what that is. Now, I'm right at the hour. It was a lot to cover. It wasn't as much as last week, but I spent a lot of time this week recovering last week. I think it was a good lesson. I hope it was helpful to all y'all who joined in. And remember, I'm keeping this stuff for posterity. It's going to be here on Facebook, on this page, which is called One Cowboy Under God, and it's also put up again on YouTube, which I intend to keep out there forever and ever and ever. Amen. Right? That page is also called One Kingdom Under God, and, One Cowboy Under God. All right, getting tongue-tied here. One Cowboy Under God on YouTube. All right, you go look at that. Not only do I have these lessons to the letter of the Hebrews, I've got other things in there. Also, most of it pertaining to Scripture and the Christian life. But also, you know, I'm starting to do some things with my hobbies, and also get put up there. I got a variety of playlists going, and there's enough to keep you entertained. If you like my calm, soothing voice, and you have difficulty sleeping at night, you could just put me on at about 11:30. Put on a playlist that has the lessons for the letter to Hebrews. It'll play all night long, and you will sleep and sleep well. I bid y'all a good night. Till we meet again. Adios.